Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading this morning from Canto 1, Chapter 9, 2 verses 20 and 21. One 19, 20, 21. Translation. O King, this is Grandfather Bhishma speaking to Maharaj Yudhisthira about Krishna. O King, that personality whom, out of ignorance only, you thought to be your maternal cousin, your very dear friend, well-wisher, counselor, messenger, benefactor, etc., is that very personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Purport, short purport. Lord Sri Krishna, although acting as the cousin, brother, friend, well-wisher, counselor, messenger, benefactor, etc. of the Pandavas, was still the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Out of his causeless mercy and favor upon his unalloyed devotees, he performs all kinds of service. But that does not mean that he has changed his position as the absolute person. To think of him as an ordinary man is the grossest type of ignorance. Now, nowhere in the verse is the word out of ignorance only in the verse. So, in other words, Bhismadeva is not pointing a finger at Yudhisthira and saying, you're ignorant. But rather, what's being pointed out is to not see Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a Yogamaya type of ignorance, that is, the type of delusion or bewilderment to not see Krishna as he is, so that intimacy in service from Krishna to his devotee can be facilitated. Just the other day there was some discussion with the devotees from China about Narada Muni's visit to Dwarka. And Narada Muni's visit to Dwarka, he had heard that Krishna married 16,108 queens, and he wanted to first-hand experience, so he visited Dwarka. And that chapter, his experience is detailed. And Krishna serves Narada. When Narada, the first palace, the first palace he entered was Rukmini's palace. Krishna stopped everything, had Narada sit in the very same seat that he was sitting, and he worshipped him. And he washed his feet and sprinkled the water from Narada's feet on his head. He addressed him as my Lord, my Master, O best of the Brahmanas. And then later, towards the end of the chapter, he speaks of Narada as my child, my beloved, in the same day to the same person. You can't just adjust the volume. Goes feedback. I can't get much closer than this. When Narada has a chance to speak to Krishna, he objects. Because Narada sees Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, how is this? I'm your devotee. Now, it's not that he didn't understand what Krishna was doing. Otherwise, how could he allow Krishna to wash his feet and worship him? At the same time, he was accepting what Krishna wanted for the reasons that Krishna was wanting to demonstrate the character of an ideal king. He also registered his objection after, saying, how's this? And when you also wanted to honor or not accept the worship of Vidura and Uddhava, then they were unhappy. So, in other words, like when Akrura went to visit Vrindavan, on his way, he was meditating on who he was going to see. And he was meditating on what he would do when he saw, and etc., etc. When he saw the footprints of Krishna embedded in the soft sand of Vrindavan, he fell out of the chariot and rolled on the ground and went mad in ecstasy, and then he saw Krishna. And Krishna treated him like a superior. Touched his feet, offered his pranams. How did Akrura feel? There's many such examples. Later, when Akrura went to the home of Nanda to request Nanda to allow Krishna to come with him to Mathura because there's a big festival, etc., etc. That whole exchange, he didn't disclose because he knew the heart of Nanda, that he's the personality of Godhead, but he knew it. And then later when they reached Mathura, Krishna promised him, and he fulfilled his promise, later I'll come visit you in your home. So after he went to Sandipani Muni's school and came back, he fulfilled his promise. There's a whole chapter of their talks in Akrura's home. Akrura realized he's the personality of Godhead. The stage of, we say, that Akrura achieved the stage of perfection by offering prayers, so that already happened on the journey from Vrindavan to Mathura. It's not a terribly long journey to go from Vrindavan to Mathura, or vice versa. It takes by Tanga. It takes by the movement of a passenger riding on a horse-drawn carriage, 2 hours or less. It took Akrura the whole day because he was so absorbed in thought of Krishna, he just didn't even know where he was going, although the road is one road. In any case, when he is with Krishna in Mathura, he speaks of Krishna's transcendence because he knew. So Narada was saying, you were not willing to accept the prayers and the worship of Uddhava and service of Uddhava and Akrura. Because Krishna likes something other than just the majesty regard. Now, in Vrindavan there's no majesty regard. In Mathura there's some, and in Dwaraka there's a lot. But even in Dwaraka, with Narada, for example, Krishna was, in one chapter, in one day, was exhibiting varieties of exchanges because he enjoys. And it's not that the devotee is amorphous. It's not that the devotee has no desire in terms of their relationship with Krishna. Even the fundamental principle is dasya. They want to serve. There's also varieties of moods of service. And that's what's being presented. There's other examples, nice examples. Sudama Brahman visiting Krishna in Dwarka. Similarly, the way in which Krishna speaks to Sudama in 3 different ways in one day. As a friend, like here, the word that's being used is Maitri or Mitra, friend. There's different. I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, but there's different words for friend, and there's different degrees of intimacy. Like he addresses Arjuna as Saka, and the cowherd boys are also known as Sakas. There's Sakis and there's Sakas. That's a very intimate kind of friend. And Maitra or Maitri is also friend, but my understanding at least is the common sense of that word is not the same intimacy, but it's a general term of a friend and a friend. And then there's like really close friends. So there's different kinds of language to indicate intensity or strength of friendship. So here he's using this word to Yudhishthira as friend. Very dear friend is used in the translation, but in addition to friend, there's Suhrit Tamam, ardent well-wisher. Suhrit Tamam, ardent well-wisher. So Krishna was certainly the well-wisher of the Pandavas. And there's an intimacy in the relationship between two, where one is obviously the superior. That's what Bhismadeva is saying. Krishna he's not just the superior, he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But he had a regard for you and your brothers as Suhrit Tama and Maitri. And these other terms, that these are terms of intimacy, where the divinity of Krishna is diminished or is eclipsed by an intimacy. Not the same as in Vrindavan, but it's not in Vrindavan, this is in Hastinapur. So like in Mathura, very similar. There's a kind of relationship where intimacy prevails, and because of the intimacy that prevails, the understanding of Krishna as the Supreme Person is, to a degree at least, eclipsed. And that's this out of ignorance only. Yogamaya is not the same as Mahamaya. Now, Yogamaya and Mahamaya, on the flip side of that, is very lengthy. Just this morning, listening to Prabhupada at 26 Second Avenue, giving an answer to Krishna's sister, Subhadra. Subhadra is his sister. At the same time, she's the Yogamaya potency in Dwarka. The Yogamaya potency has her place in each of Krishna's pastimes, and her expansion is Durga. So somebody wanted to know. Prabhupada gave like a 10-minute answer and explained it again. And is it clear? And then he explained it again, using the example of electricity and some other examples. It's one energy, comes from an electrical powerhouse, and then depending on how it's deployed, makes something hot, makes something cold, but it's one energy. So his point was, Krishna's potency, Parasya Shakti Vivadaiva Shruyate, his potency is transcendental. But it is seen otherwise depending upon one's regard for Krishna. It may be seen as something unpleasant. Like, then he gave another example. The government has a welfare department, it has a police department. It's one government. And it's not like they think, oh, the police department, I don't have anything to do with that police department. The government needs a police department. So Durga is the police department. And then there's the Yogamaya. Just like when Krishna appeared, and he gave before he appeared, he told Yogamaya what to do. 1, 2, 3, 4. Transfer, Balaram, etc. And then in the end, you'll become Durga. It's one energy, differently manifest depending upon the purpose. But then how does devotional service make things transcendental? Because otherwise, Durga. It has everything to do with offering to Krishna, or regard for Krishna, or seeing in relation to Krishna and acting accordingly. And then that same energy acts differently. And thus, for a transcendentalist, they see Krishna everywhere. They see Krishna's potencies everywhere. Although by nature, the potency in and of itself can be bewildering this way, or can be bewildering in that way. One way is drawing one closer to Krishna, and the other way is keeping one away from Krishna. One energy. There's diversity within that one energy, but one energy. He went to Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. So if you're an impersonalist, there's no energy. All there is Brahman. However, if you're a personalist, you understand Brahman includes potency. And potency is diversely manifest. So you don't cut off the Supreme Lord from his potency, because he has potency. Anyway, there's varieties of relationship in this verse, where Bhismadeva understands the variety, but he also understands the divinity of Krishna. He is one of our Mahajans, so his words are very important, very authoritative. We should try to understand them. So while there is this intimacy that you, Yudhisthira, have experienced, you think he's your cousin, you think he's your friend, you think he's your well-wisher, you think he's your messenger. What was the messenger service? Who can say? The messenger service of Krishna. At least one. Raise your hand, and rather than just speak up, because then it won't be 10 people speaking. Go ahead. Yeah. It was Yudhishthira's desire, so Krishna said, let me carry that message. Any other examples? Krishna being the messenger? There's another one, I can't think of it right now. So, you think of him this way. It's not that Yudhishthira didn't know, but when the intimacy is very strong, then that remembrance or perception subsides a bit. and the intimacy becomes more prominent. So it's just Bhismadeva reminding him, not that he didn't know, but Bhismadeva is reminding him. So now we'll go on to the next verse. Being the absolute personality of Godhead, he is present in everyone's heart. He is equally kind to everyone, and he is free from the false ego of differentiation. The false ego of differentiation. The false ego of differentiation. So, normally, at least I'm not accustomed to thinking of differentiation as rooted in false ego. But there's spiritual and there's material differentiation. There's variegatedness in the spiritual realm. And that differentiation, due to false ego, obscures Krishna by seeing the differentiations or the upadhis. Then the soul is not perceived if we just see the differentiations. And what to speak of the Supreme Soul who's within the heart of every individual soul. He is free from the false ego of differentiation. Therefore, whatever he does is free from material inebriety. He is the equibalanced. Niravadyasya is free from all attachment, and anahankrite, free from all material identity of false ego. Anahankrite, ahankar, false ego. Anahankrite. So he doesn't have that false ego, but he acts seemingly to some as if he's like one of us. But we readers of the Bhagavatam should understand that's not the platform from which he acts. We know this, but it's necessary to hear it again and 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 again until it's not just like, all right, I get it. It becomes part of how we see things, because there's covering. The covering of false ego. The covering of false ego. We're covered by false ego. The soul, even before the soul gets a body and starts doing things with the body, the soul is covered with false ego. It's insidious. And then it's the first thing that comes, it's the last thing that goes. So it's natural to think of, conditioned-wise, it's natural to think of the Supreme Soul as like us, moved by false ego. We don't step apart from false ego, look at that, that's... False ego in the conventional sense, it means someone who's really puffed up. With a swagger, without naming names. We know some people that have such propensity. And the term, rather than moving with a swagger or, in big inflated pride, it just means a misconception of who we really are. That is, the most subtle layer of covering of ourselves as eternal servants of Krishna. Or, I wish to be the master of something, however modest it might be, or however grand it may be. It's the covering, it's the disconnect with Krishna. To have an idea that I want to be an independent enjoyer, which is the illusory idea or desire, we have to have false ego. And sure enough, we have false ego. However gentle that person might be, false ego. However good that person may be, false ego. And false ego deludes the soul from seeing what his real position is as the eternal servant. So platitudes or directional kinds of notions about being a servant, that's nice, but it has to, it has to go further. The Bhagavatam is helping us take it to that stage. And Krishna is free from false ego, and as a result, he acts for the welfare of all. Even when he does things that look like, it's hurtful to somebody, kills demons or something. It looks hurtful, looks like, but it's beneficial. And even for a devotee going through some difficulty, sometimes devotees go through difficulty. Why? Because they're a good devotee. Or we may go through something that's like problematic. But he is free from material inebriety. No, inebriety. Inebriety, when someone is inebriated, it means they're drunk. That's another word for being drunk. Inebriated. You can't tell what's what. Material inebriety. He's free from that. He is equibalanced. He's fair to everyone. Purport. Because he is absolute, there is nothing different from him. He is Kaivalya. Semicolon. There's nothing except himself. Everything and everyone is the manifestation of his energy, and thus he is present everywhere by his energy. That's one of the ways he's present everywhere, is by his energy. He's also present everywhere as Super Soul in this realm. But by his energy is one of the ways. By his Brahman feature, he's present everywhere also. He has multiple ways of being ever present. This is one. By his energy, he's ever present. The sun is identified with every inch of the sun's rays and every molecular particle of the rays. Similarly, the Lord is distributed by different energies. He is Paramatma, or the Super Soul, present in every one as the supreme guidance, and therefore he is already the chariot driver and counselor of all living beings. So there. He was Arjun's chariot driver, but he's everyone's chariot driver. As Super Soul. Nice, huh? When he, therefore, exhibits himself as chariot driver of Arjuna, there is no change in his exalted position. It is the power of devotional service only that demonstrates him as the chariot driver or the messenger, since he has nothing to do with the material conception of life. Because he is absolute spiritual identity, there is for him no superior or inferior action. Being the absolute personality of Godhead, he has no false ego, and so he does not identify himself with anything different from him. The material conception of ego is equibalanced in him. The material conception of ego is equibalanced in him. He does not feel, therefore, inferior by becoming the chariot driver of his pure devotee. It is the glory of the pure devotee that only he, the pure devotee, can bring about service from the affectionate Lord. Now, in the external realm, because the Lord, as the chariot driver within the heart of all living beings, that's a service, isn't it? He doesn't lose the position of being the Lord by taking that position of service. That's the point. It's an important lesson by one of the 12 Mahajans, Grandfather Bhishma, helping, because he was always, imagine having such a grandfather, always instructing the Pandavas from the very get-go when they returned from the forest under the advice of Vyasadeva. He just accepted the position of their father, although he was their grandfather. He had no children of his own, but they were his children. And he's a Mahajan. And they're pure devotees also. And so it's natural. The relationship was very natural. And their regard for him was also very natural. Wasn't sometimes not, sometimes not. It was always. And the scene in this chapter 9 of Canto 1, it's his final moments. And he doesn't change his position in relation to them. He's their guide in life. And the guide in life is reminding them of a proper understanding of Krishna. So when we make Srimad Bhagavatam our guiding light in life, it's easy. Read Srimad Bhagavatam regularly, and that's what happens. That's what happens. Srimad Bhagavatam starts to sit in your heart. It enters your heart, and the messages of Srimad Bhagavatam are there guiding. It's like that. It's a different experience. It's a totally different experience. Day and night difference. So let's see if there's some discussion.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, thank you so much for this nice class in the morning. And I see that very beautiful. It's not really a question. And I've been right from Orlando, the class, when you mentioned that how Krishna tried to please Narad Muni by washing his lotus feet.
Yeah.
And also, Narad Muni wanted to please Krishna, allowing him to do that. But Narad Muni does not feel that Krishna does not have to do that. And the same thing happened for Sudama.
Yes.
And then also Krishna does this when during the coronation of Yudhishthir Maharaj, he washed the feet of the guests that came. And just wanted to take this a bit further, how we as devotees can apply this in our life. Sometimes we don't want to do something, but we have to please other devotees. And because sometimes, for example, when we are sitting, we are serving prasadam. I see that many times. Some devotee will come and try to collect, the plate after taking prasadam. But some devotees are very reluctant to give the other devotee an opportunity to serve. I just want you to just expand a little on that. How devotees can use this as an opportunity to give other devotees opportunity to serve devotees.
It's transcendental competition. It's not like this is right and that's wrong. Or that's right and this is wrong. There's different moods. And, so some devotee wants to serve and some devotee wants to not be served. How wholesome is it if yes, I want to be served. So, supposing they have a desire, I don't want to be served. Supposing. Is that wrong? No. It's, they have to negotiate. Let's take the example, the example from Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Kalakrishna Das wanted to take the remnants of prasad from all the Vaishnavas in Bengal. And how many Vaishnavas is that at that time? Too many. Not too many, but, many, many. And so people would say no. And then he would do it anyways by his tricks. So he was respecting the humility of the Vaishnavas, and at the same time he was finding a way to serve. So it's fine. It's not like the devotee that, using this particular example, doesn't want someone to take their plate so they can wash it or whatever that you want to do with it. Or, lick the remnants that are on the plate, or whatever the devotee wants to do. Someone may not want to do that. They could make a deal. Look, I'll let you take my plate if I can take your plate. It's transcendental competition. If the main point is that Krishna should be pleased, and there are different ways that Krishna can be pleased. So such a devotee that wants to serve, he'll find another way to serve. He'll find a way to serve where the person doesn't even know that he's serving. Respecting the mood of the devotee that doesn't want to receive service, he'll find a way to give service where the person who's receiving the service doesn't even know it. And he's happy because he's not disturbing his mood, but he's serving the other's mood. So there's variegatedness in spiritual life, fortunately. So your premise is we shouldn't deprive others of the opportunity to serve. That's the starting point.
Yes, because we know that Krishna, like somebody who declares that I want to serve Krishna, Krishna does not like this. He like you to serve his devotee better.
Well, it's not that Krishna doesn't like this, but, Krishna likes the other better. Even more he likes. So it's not like he doesn't like people to serve him. Just editing the language a little bit. Yes, Krishna likes. And Krishna also likes people that are quite humble. I mean, let's go to the Sudama Brahman story. When he went, he didn't ask Krishna what his wife wanted him to ask. And Krishna didn't ask him, what has brought you here? Although he knew. And Sudama knew that he knew. But Krishna's so kind, he didn't even ask. Anyway. And Krishna didn't ask, although he knew. But Krishna, what is it that Krishna doesn't know? So why does he ask anything? It's, so there's variegatedness. It's not, as it's said, the movements of love are like the movements of a snake. Yes. To go from point A to point B, does the snake go like this? No. So the movements of love are like that. So don't object to the movements of love because it's lovable. It's the nature of love. The essence is to honor that Krishna is to be pleased, and there's n number of ways by which Krishna will be pleased. Yes, up front.
Hare Krishna, Pranam Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
I don't have much clarification, so I need to ask. I have some confusion about the fact, like I've heard from one of your class.
Keep going.
From one of your class that we all the jivas had the desire to enjoy separately, so we ended up in this material world.
Not all living entities,
Not
but all of us here.
The jivas.
Yeah, all of us, all jivas in the material world, they're jivas in the spiritual world, far greater in number that don't have that desire.
Yeah. So, and also that were we ever with Krishna, or were we always Bahirmukhi? Because in one of the other lecture from someone in ISKCON, I have heard that we were always Bahirmukhi and we were never
Okay.
there. We were
Okay.
never there.
I have an answer to this, and it may or may not be satisfying. Both answers are correct, and the sense of there's a conflict or dichotomy has to do with an understanding of our eternal relationship with Krishna and how to keep it simple, because it can get complicated real quick. I like the simple is, you know who is Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he in 1896 he wrote many things. It's when he completed Jaiva Dharma, for example, same year. You said without a list of 1896 books he wrote, there's like 5 of them, and one of them was in English. Little skinny book. Sri Chaitanya, His Life and Precepts, in English. You're familiar with that. So the life was the Leela, and the precepts was his classic, the 10 essential teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Dasamula Tattva. So that's the second half of the book. Now, in one of the 10 root teachings, or essence teachings of Lord Chaitanya, is some living entities are bound, some living entities are conditioned. One of the essential teachings. In that, in English, so it's not a matter of is it properly translated or not, because that can be a question sometime. What was his intention if it was written in Bengali? It was in English. Do not ask the misleading question, when were the living entities created, or when the living entities were bound. Now, he doesn't say the living entities are not bound. There's limits in language. That's another part of his teaching. There's limits in language. We think of things in terms of time as we know it. But what's the sense of time different than as time as we know it? Is there a possibility, listen carefully, is there a possibility of an event that's not within time? There's chronological events, and then there's ontological events. What's an ontological event? Ontology means, the sense of being, the reality of what is. Ontology, what is. So like, for example, living entities are eternal parts of Krishna. Jivair Svarupaya Nityara Krishna Das. We're eternally part of Krishna. So that's an ontological statement of the living entities. The living entities become bound. Sounds like an event within time. But it's not an event within time. But is it an event? Is there such a thing as an event that's not within time? There is such a thing as an event that's not within time, but it's still an event that's not within time. So our little tiny brain, the binary processor faculty, the mind, can't compute that one. It's either a 1 or a 0. And it's either 1 or a 0. To say that there are events that are not within time doesn't compute. There are events. Krishna's pastimes are eternal. Living entities are eternal. Living entities are bound. Is that an event? It's an event. Within time? No. Anadi. That's the key word, the operative word. Since time immemorial. The way Prabhupada describes it is, you cannot go back in time far enough to find when it began. That's an anadi event. Is it an event? Yes. Not within time as we know it, but it's an event. So otherwise, let's flip it the other way. And some living entities are eternally conditioned, some living entities are eternally liberated, and there's no event. That means the Lord is capricious or whimsical. You just go over there, and you stay with me. And eternally like that. Is that the loving Supreme Lord? No. So then, if you want to place, you want to say what's the cause, we will think of a cause within time. But supposing it's a cause that's beyond time as we know it. Bahir Mukha Jeev. Bahir, away. Mukha, face. Jeev, living entity. We're Bahir Mukha Jeevs. You follow? So to say the living entity is eternally Bahir Mukha Jeev, does that mean, what does that mean? Did we turn our face away from Krishna or not? Is it an event that's not within time? Is there such a thing? So, there's some people that would throw rotten tomatoes at me because they don't like that explanation. But from my perspective, it doesn't confront or deny the anadi feature of the living entity's sojourn in the material world. Because another one of the 10 essential teachings is some living entities become liberated. Is that an event within time as we know it? Well, it may look like it's an event within time as we know it, because here's the conditioned soul, and then now that same soul becomes liberated. But you connect with eternal time, and what happens to the time as we knew it? It's illusory. It's ephemeral. It's absolutely insignificant, the sojourn in the material world. It doesn't feel like it. Feels quite different than, non-existent and insignificant, and seems really significant. And time is passing as conditioned souls. Don't tell me time isn't passing. Time is destroying all things, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So that's time as we know it. But there's eternal time. Again, it's Krishna's one energy acting to disconnect, and Krishna's one energy acting to connect. One energy. And we're in that marginal position where do we turn our mukha? If it's Bahir Mukha, here we are. Since time immemorial, no problem. An anadi event. Was the living entity turn their face away from Krishna? Yes. Is it within time? No. Don't ask, here's the phrase again, I like it. Don't ask the misleading question, when the living entities were created, or when they were enthralled. It's an anadi event. Is it an event? Is it not an event because the Lord was just whimsical and said, look, again, the language places it within time. You go over there, you stay here. That's not an event. That's an event within time, but it's not an event within time. It's an event. And returning is a transcendental event as well. I'm trying to be responsive to your question, because sometimes you'll hear this from our acharyas, not just me, and sometimes you'll hear that. And I'm saying it's a false dichotomy due to language, as if it's an event in time, but it's not an event in time. Once upon a time, the living entities are in the spiritual world. Krishna looked at his watch and said, you know what? Eternally, some living entity should go to the material world and suffer. That's not our Lord. So then so then the other way is it's eternal. Eternal! And then comes the question, so what's bondage? What's liberation? From bondage. Forgetfulness of Krishna. So we trace it out in time. When did that forgetfulness of Krishna begin? You can't go far enough back in time and find out when he began. So it's anadi, eternally. In bondage. In ignorance of Krishna, ignoring Krishna. I mean, again, I'll volunteer the fact that there would be scholarly people who will hear this description and go, let me reach for my rotten tomatoes and throw them. It's not like that. It's like this. And the other people on the other side will say, it's not like that either. Here's another. In chapter 13 of Bhagavad Gita, the word anadi is used, and in the purport, Prabhupada just explains it's not possible in the conditioned state to understand this term anadi. We can give a definition, but we'll understand it only when we become liberated, which sounds like an event in time. But, to understand timelessness, you have to be in timelessness. You can have a notion of it, limited notion of it. Okay, something else? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you so much for narrating these beautiful relationship that Krishna reciprocates with his devotees. We also, in our present role, change our relationships with our families or friends.
Yes.
So I guess we can understand, right, a little bit how
a
Krishna.
little bit, right.
I have heard that this present life is like a dream. Like our soul is there in the spiritual world, but this is like I don't know, I heard it somewhere, maybe I'm so I wanted to find out why and how.
This is the anadi again. So our soul is in the spiritual world. Let me say back what you said you heard. Our soul is in the spiritual world, and this is but a dream. And we wake up from the dream, we'll know, hey, that was just a dream. We may not even remember the dream because we're in the spiritual world. We're all absorbed in being in the spiritual world. That's what you've heard. So you want to know, is that a correct understanding? I've never heard such an understanding. It's very creative. I've never heard it from anyone, not from our acharyas or commentators, contemporary commentators. I never heard it from any source. So I'm very cautious of hearing something that doesn't come from our acharyas. Certainly Prabhupada spoke of the daydream and the night dream, and they're both dreams. You know that one. So if they're both dreams, then what's the reality? Now, this proposition that you just repeated is the reality is we're at this very moment in time, we're in the spiritual world with Krishna because we're eternally with Krishna. And this is but a dream. Row, row, row your boat. Life is but a dream. I mean, it's to hear this, because I'm hearing it for the first time, I'm processing what is intended by this and what, etc. More important to me, what's the source of this description or notion? And I'm unaware of the source, from our perfected acharyas or scriptures directly. So I have a lot of caution. One who is in the material atmosphere, it's not to say that one is not in the material atmosphere. One is in the material atmosphere. The living entity, like, let's take the example of the process of creation. In the process of creation, Mahavishnu glances over Pradhan. The living entities are entrusted by his internal potency, Rama Devi. The jivas are entrusted to that glance, who is Shambhu. And along with the time energy, the living entities are sent into Pradhan. And then the whole show starts. So this notion would say that's not true. What's true is we're eternally with Krishna, not in the body of Mahavishnu, not being carried by the glance of Mahavishnu into the Pradhan and all the rest. It's just not true. It's a stork story. It's a fiction. So we can feel good, and then one day wake up or whatever by processes of restoring original consciousness, and we'll recognize we are now, and we're always. It seems very implausible from our scripturals, and it's not just only in one place, it's in multiple places, the creation description. Then it would just make that fiction. And why tell a fiction in scripture? So it doesn't, for two reasons, it doesn't digest well. I'd never heard it before, and it would seem to be a negation of many statements in scripture about the process of creation and the unfolding of that process of creation. And many other, like Sankhya teachings, the energies that then become manifest from that process of creation, the unfolding of the energies themselves, what to speak of in the building of, it's all fiction. But a dream. Doesn't process well. You have something.
It was just a comment from the Bahirmukha. Now, if we take it in a logical statement, we know Krishna is very merciful, and he wants all living entity to come back. This is what Krishna wants. Because we don't want to go, that's why we are here. That means what you say that it cannot be logical in a way, because that Krishna decide that, you go there eternally, and we stay here, some here. That means it's more logical the way you explain.
There's desire.
Yes, it's about desire. Those that want to stay here, they will stay here because of their desire.
He's a loving father will allow a child to do things that he may not wish them to do because he's a loving father.
Exactly.
He'll advise them otherwise, but if they insist, then he's not going to put them out of existence.
Yes. Yes. Even logic will.
It's desire, that the living entities have desire. It's fundamental. As the supreme, the living entities.
Yes, the free will, the desire, and all that.
Yeah. So it's there. And so if you place the event in time, then it's misleading. If it's an event that's not within time, it's sensible. There's a desire that's a misuse of free will, and here we are.
Yeah.
But it's an event, not within time, an anadi event.
Yes, as you always say, the fall of the jiva. This is always confusing.
Yeah, it's one of those topics.
Yes. Hare Krishna.
You have something.
Hare
I
Krishna.
could tell even before you raised your hand that you had something.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. Thank you very much for the lecture. This question is not from today's class.
That's okay.
So this is from your previous class, from the Ramayana series,
Okay.
Lord Ram, the birth of Lord Ram. So in that lecture you mentioned the best friend of Dasarath Maharaj, who he gave his daughter as for adoption. I mean, I'm talking about Romapada, the King Romapada. So in that you mentioned Srila Prabhupada, when he's giving you the name, he didn't mention this story, but he mentioned a different story to you, but you didn't tell that in the lecture. So I want to know, like, what is the story that Srila Prabhupada
Well,
told you?
the detail, this is my memory. I went back and looked at the transcription, which is not, the transcription is more verbatim, but my memory is that the system that was followed is Aravinda, who was Prabhupada's personal servant at that time, would get the names and write them down, and then when it came time to giving the names, Aravinda would say the name, and then Prabhupada would repeat the name. Your name is. So he read the name, Romapada. Prabhupada corrected him, Ramapada. I remember, Aravinda turned and looked at Prabhupada and said, R-O-M-A. It was like correcting Prabhupada. Apparently that was part of a series of things that resulted in Aravinda falling down. Because of intimate service came familiarity, came offense. He fell down. And he was very, very wonderful devotee. I knew him, when I first joined. He was in the Boston Temple when I first joined. Wonderful devotee. Therefore given the service of servant, and therefore intimacy, and therefore familiarity, and therefore... So then Prabhupada said, that my memory was, it went back and forth a couple times, but in any case, then Prabhupada said, Roma refers to the speaker of the Bhagavatam, Roma Harshan, and Pada means the disciple of. So, Roma Harshan Sutta, his son was Sutta Goswami, the speaker of the Bhagavatam. That was what Prabhupada gave, Roma Pada, the speaker of the Bhagavatam. And we didn't say all of that, that's unpacking it a little bit. It was very quick. Anything else? Online, anything?
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So Maharaj, if you see the story, the Vidura, actually Krishna was visiting Hastinapur as a messenger,
Yes.
and even so Vidura was there and he was dining with Krishna, but eventually Vidura left Hastinapur by
Yes.
himself.
Yes.
But Krishna was visiting Hastinapur and doing all the things. all the scriptures says Krishna's darshan itself is so wonderful.
Yes.
By knowing this also, Vidura left the palace.
Yes.
On the other hand, if you see Bhishmadev,
He stayed.
he was staying there. So how can we understand how to take the lesson from this?
Okay. Krishna had Vidura in a role of service. Krishna had Bhishma in a role of service, and there were different roles of service. That's how we can understand it. Now, as events unfolded, what the long-term plan for Vidura wasn't clear. When he left, what the long-term plan of Krishna was not clear, but there was a plan. One of those plans was that Vidura would become purified by visiting holy places and hearing from sadhus at those holy places. Next, Vidura would hear Krishna speak Uddhava Gita to Uddhava. Vidura heard. And then Vidura came back. Vidura heard from Maitreya. Vidura came back and delivered Dhritarashtra. He had a service for a plan for Vidura. So there's the variety. There's a few other things, many other things, but there was a service plan, and Vidura was to be an instrument for Krishna's service plan for Vidura. Another, external reason is he left not simply because he was insulted. Bhishma wasn't insulted. Vidura was insulted. He didn't leave simply because he was insulted. But he had a particular service mood. And his particular service mood was to help his brother, his elder brother, and his sons, behave properly toward Krishna. And when he saw it, there's no more service for me here. There's no more service for me here. I've tried and tried and tried, and he didn't leave because he was insulted. I'm out of here. You spit on you people. That wasn't Vidura. When at a certain point, so a lesson, which is your question, when there's no more service, try and try and try, then you need another opportunity for service. You may. When that point comes, that's not easy to discern, but Vidura discerned, no more service for me here, and he left. And he left his bow by the door, which signified, I don't have to make a decision here about fighting. I'm being maintained by the royal family, and if I continue, then I'll have to make a decision to not follow that scriptural injunction. You assist those who maintain you. Here's my bow. And he didn't even say Haribol to his wife. He just went on pilgrimage. Later he came back, and his wife was a very exalted lady. But, she had the benefit of her exalted husband. It was like an impromptu vanaprastha. And Krishna had another plan for Bhishma, to teach lessons through Bhishma. And then to exonerate beyond any shadow of doubt the elevated position of Bhishma, even though Bhishma didn't stop the defiling of Draupadi, and even Bhishma didn't leave the side of the Kauravas, even though Bhishma took a vow to kill Arjuna. Krishna wanted to show Grandfather Bhishma's exaltedness, and then give Grandfather Bhishma this opportunity to speak to Yudhisthira before his departure, and to show his exalted departure. So Krishna had a service plan for both of them that was different. Now between the two, Bhishma is the Mahajan. But it's not to diminish the significance of Vidura, because Vidura heard in detail from Maitreya, as well as Vidura heard in detail the Uddhava Gita. What do you think? Excuse me, it's not Vidura heard Uddhava Gita. I take it back. Maitreya heard Uddhava Gita. Maitreya heard Uddhava Gita. I take it back. He had the opportunity to hear from Maitreya, who heard Uddhava Gita. So had some service opportunity for him. That, it's like several chapters, several cantos of the Bhagavatam. He had a service opportunity. Perfect questions, perfect answers, service. Something further.
So, Maharaj,
Keep going.
so how do we understand our service plan?
How do we understand Krishna's plan? Live your life. You may not know what's around the corner. As the unfolding of life goes on, you may not know what's next. So you become a pure devotee, and you'll, if Krishna wants you to know what's next, you'll know what's next. So what do you do in that situation? You take fundamental things, and you reside with fundamental things. Your life becomes filled with those, and then the realization is, if Krishna so desires, what his plan is will become understood. If Krishna so desires. But at least the fundamental things, they're clear. That's Krishna's plan. Okay, I think we'll end there. Srila Prabhupada ki.